Hello again. I sometimes wonder why almost everybody sends their children to school without even considering whether this is a wise or desirable course of action. It does rather seem to be the default setting for modern society. Tommy is 4, you'll be starting school any day now. Why we think that way is an interesting point. Of course, for some people, it's a matter of economic necessity. To maintain what they see as a reasonable lifestyle, 2 full-time salaries are required. Without them, there would be no foreign holidays, smart cars, and so on. Single mothers too would find it a problem giving up work to educate their children. There are, though, many people who could do it if they wished, although it might mean a drop in income. When my daughter was small, my wife and I both worked part-time, which meant that money was a bit tight. There was not enough to spare for holidays abroad and so on. But actually, a couple can often get by in this way if they don't mind being poorer than many of their friends and neighbours. We were very poor. When my daughter was born, I enjoyed her company enormously and loved teaching her to read and so on. It simply never occurred to either my wife or me to send her to school. Why would we do so if it wasn't strictly necessary? You don't have to tell anybody if you're not sending a child to school. There's no legal requirement to do anything other than provide an education, which we were already doing, so that question didn't arise. I wrote a book on this subject a few years ago, to which I give a link in the description to this video. It's an academic work rather than a personal account. What are the disadvantages of school? What was it that made me decide that it wasn't the best idea? That is to say, why would anybody choose not to send their child to school? School is great for socializing, getting children used to being with others and fitting into society. The problem is that it's not really a very efficient way of providing education. Everything has to be geared to the slowest in the class because streaming is frowned on these days. So when children begin school, there will be some who can already read, but there will also be others who have never handled a book in their lives and barely know how to speak coherently, let alone read. They first have to be taught how speech works, and this is done by things like clapping out the syllables in the names of the children in the class, for example, as in David, Mohammed. Then they're taught about patterns by stringing different coloured and shaped beads on strings. They might also do repeating patterns, drawing with a pencil, just zigzag lines or dots or circles. These are all designed to teach the 4 and 5-year-olds pre-reading skills. That is to say, to familiarise them with the concepts that they will need for reading. Of course, for a child who can already read, this will be torture, and they're likely to regress, to go backward in their skills. Teachers don't like children who are too advanced because it makes it hard to cater for the bright ones. I've known teachers who ask parents not to let their children read too much at home because they are progressing too fast and would become bored in class. In other words, everything is geared to the lowest achiever. This is pretty well the pattern throughout school, with more emphasis being placed on getting the slow ones to catch up than for the quick ones to do even better. In fact, a lot of the time, the aim is to slow down the high achievers so that they don't get too far ahead, because it's much easier to teach a class where all the children have the same ability rather than to have some very slow and some very intelligent. The whole business with school is to make everybody have the same intelligence and the same way of thinking. Any person of average intelligence can teach their own child. It's not necessary to be an expert in any field. The information needed by the child to pass GCSEs or international GCSEs is all freely available on the internet from the various exam boards. It does mean, of course, that evenings, after the child is in bed, will need to be spent planning and reading books on different subjects in preparation for the next day's learning, rather than relaxing in front of the television with a glass of wine. Home education is like having a full-time second job in addition to what you are actually doing to earn a living. Of course, socialization is something which is always mentioned, and this can be a problem. My daughter attended Sunday school at the local Methodist church. She belonged to Girls' Brigade, did ballet classes, and was also a member of a chess club. But there's no doubt that school is better often at social life than home education. There's no perfect way of education. Clearly, home education is better from a purely educational perspective. The unlimited one-to-one attention during lessons in a relaxed domestic setting are a far more efficient way of imparting knowledge and understanding than being part of the conveyor belt of 30 children geared to the least able child in the group. However, socially, school does have an advantage in some ways. Mind, children also pick up bad habits from their friends, and this too was something I wished to guard against. The main reason I didn't send my child to school was educational. I thought it might harm her education. But there was a religious aspect as well. I wanted her to grow up with a love of and respect for the Lord, and most modern schools tend to be geared more to an atheist outlook. I wanted my daughter's morality to be grounded in absolute rather than relativist terms. I also didn't think it would be brilliant for her to spend too much time associating with children, perhaps from families that didn't believe in God. That was why things like the Sunday school church and Girls' Brigade tended to be an important part of her education for me. I'd be curious to know if any other viewers educated their own children, and if so, how they found the experience.